There's a thought running in your head right now that feels like an objective truth, but it isn't yours. Someone else put it there years ago, and you've been speaking it in your own head on their behalf ever since. Here's how you find out using 2 words. The technique I'm about to show you is the fastest way that I know how to interrupt limiting beliefs at their source. It's called Says Who, and it works because it reveals something that most people never realize. You are the voice. Even if the belief came from someone else originally, you're the only one that's speaking it to yourself right now. And that means you can choose to stop. This is a 4-stage process, and you can use this today. By the end of this video, you will have a tool that can dismantle decades of programming in minutes. And I say this knowing it because I have done it with thousands of clients. Most people think their limiting beliefs are facts that are real. I'm not good with money. I'm not the type of person who blah, 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 blah. I could never blah, 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 blah. They experience these thoughts as objective reality rather than opinions that they are choosing to reinforce. But here's what changes everything. You are the voice. Even if your dad told you that you'd never amount to anything, even if your teacher said that you weren't smart enough, even if society programmed you to believe that you don't deserve success, right now, in this moment, you are the one speaking those limitations to yourself. And if you're the one speaking them, you can choose to stop. The first stage is self-recognition. It is the hardest because it requires you to take responsibility for your own internal dialogue. When you catch yourself thinking a limiting thought, you have to ask, says who? The immediate answer, the one that matters the most, is, well, me. I do. Not your parents, not your teachers, not society, you, right now in this moment. And it is uncomfortable because it removes the comfort of external blame. It is so much easier to say, well, my dad never believed in me, than to say, well, I'm actively choosing to not believe in myself. But the discomfort is the price of freedom. You cannot change what you don't own. Let me give you an example. I had a client who kept saying, I'm just not a natural salesperson. Every time we talked about growing his business, that sentence would come up. I'm just not built for sales. I'm just not like this. I don't like doing it. When I first asked him, says who? His first instinct was to point to real evidence, stuff that had happened in his life. Well, I've never been good at it, and I'm just more introverted as a personality, and this and that and everything else. And every time I asked, says who? He got deeper and deeper and deeper. And finally, he got it. He said, I do, I guess. I'm the one saying it to myself. And that is stage 1. Self-recognition. You are the current speaker of this limitation. Stage 2 is source identification. Once you've acknowledged that you're the current voice, the next question is, where did this originally come from? It's not about blaming yourself. It's not about finding someone who is the cause of the problem. It's about archaeology. You got to figure out and trace the belief back to its source so you can evaluate whether the source deserves any authority that you've been unconsciously giving it. So my client with the sales belief traced it back to his dad, who used to say, we are not pushy people, whenever they encountered aggressive salespeople. It was an immediate turnoff. His dad meant it as a value statement about integrity, but my client in his own head had internalized it as, I can't be good at sales because the only salespeople I've ever seen are all pushy and I'm not allowed to be pushy. The belief had been running his business decisions for the last 15, 20 years. Every time he had an opportunity to sell, that voice in his head would say, well, we're not pushy people, so we can't ask for the sale. But it wasn't his voice. It wasn't good business sense. It was his dad's voice spoken through him years and years and years ago that kept running in his head. Stage 3 is authority evaluation, and this is where you get to be ruthless. Does the original source of the belief actually deserve the authority that you're giving it? Ask yourself, what was their expertise in the area? What was their motivation for saying this? Were they speaking from their own limitations or from actual genuine wisdom? And then, most importantly, was this assessment based on current, accurate information about you? In my client's case, right, his dad was someone who was a good man, valued integrity, but he'd never built a business. He'd never even been in sales. He'd never had to sell anything. He was speaking from his own discomfort with being on the receiving end of it, not from actually understanding or having any real knowledge about what good salesmanship looks like. More importantly, his father had said, we are not pushy people, when my client was in his early teens. The assessment wasn't even about him specifically. It was a general family value statement that he'd internalized as a limitation of his own abilities. Why was he given his dad the license to do this? This was a 40-year-old comment from someone with no sales experience who'd never run a business, and it was now running his business decisions. The final stage is conscious choice. You reclaim your ability to govern your own life here. Having recognized that you are the current speaker, you've identified the original source, you've evaluated whether they are actually an authority to give you reasonable advice, you now get to make the conscious choice. Do you want to keep saying this limitation to yourself, or do you want to choose something differently? The number one thing that I hear from people is, yeah, but how do I just choose differently? Well, you currently choose what you think now. You do it in the same way. This is not about positive affirmations. It's about consciously saying, hey, I used to think this, and now I'm choosing not to. You are giving authority to voices that don't deserve it. Now you get to be the voice. My client chose differently. Instead of I'm not a natural salesperson, he now says I'm someone who helps people by serving them to see how my solution actually solves their problems. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. It is the same activity you are now selling, but from a completely different identity frame. And because it was his conscious choice, rather than an inherited limitation from somebody else, it sticks. Here's what's really powerful about this technique. When it lands, you will feel it in your body. There is almost a moment physiologically where you'll feel it. It's like recognition. It's like waking up from a dream where you're like, oh my God, I'm light now. Someone else's limitation isn't weighing me down. And I've seen people break down when this happens, right? Like, the work is deep, and some people just break down crying, not because, they're sad, but because they now realize that they've been carrying this belief for so long, and it physically weighs them down. And they have been imprisoned by this, but the door was unlocked the whole time. Now, the says who technique doesn't work when you're using it to avoid rather than to interrupt. If you ask says who to one of these limiting beliefs, but you're not actually willing to take responsibility for being the current voice, it just becomes mental masturbation. It's another mental trick that you think will be useful. The technique requires genuine ownership. You have to be willing to acknowledge that regardless of where it came from originally, you're the one keeping it alive now. And if you're unwilling to do that, it won't work. It also doesn't work on beliefs that are actually serving you. If you believe I'm someone who keeps my word, and you trace that back to a parent who was the perfect model of integrity, you might decide that that's actually a voice worth keeping. It might actually help you. The point isn't to question every belief that you have. The point is to question the ones that are limiting you, and to realize you have a choice about which ones that you keep and amplify. The daily practice here is you have to start paying attention to your own internal dialogue. And when you catch yourself thinking something limiting, you ask, says who? If the answer is, I do, then you find out, where did it come from? And if you can identify the source, ask whether they deserve the authority that you've given them. And if they don't, consciously, what do you want to think? This isn't a one-time exercise. It is a practice. This is a muscle that you have to develop over and over and over again. The more that you do it, the more you realize how much of your internal dialogue really isn't yours at all. Says Who is level 3 identity work. It is about changing the fundamental choices that you make about who you are and what's possible for you. And if you want to understand the full architecture of how this change works, watch my video on the 3 levels of choice. That is the foundation that everything else is built upon.